Ao Adekunle, a Nigerian billionaire, lived a life of meticulous order. His private jet was a sanctuary from the chaos of Lagos, but on a quiet Tuesday morning, he discovered it had been breached. Curled up on a plush seat was a young woman named Chidinma, an exhausted caterer who had simply mistaken his plane for an empty hangar. This improbable encounter would be the catalyst for a love story neither could have predicted, a journey that would challenge his worldview and pull them both into a high-stakes conspiracy. Hello, bestie. Welcome. Please stay with me as I unfold this interesting romantic story. If you enjoy the story, please support us by subscribing to this channel and hit the notification button for more. Thank you. Grab your popcorn, sit back, relax, and enjoy this story. Ao Adekunle's life was a testament to meticulous planning and flawless execution. As the CEO of Adekunle Group, his mornings were as carefully orchestrated as a symphony. The aroma of freshly brewed Colombian coffee filled the air of his penthouse before sunrise. A private chauffeur whisked him through the Lagos traffic with pre-calculated efficiency, and his private jet, the gleaming jewel of his corporate fleet, was always a sanctuary of quiet luxury. Today was no different. He was scheduled for a crucial business trip to Abuja, a meeting that could secure the largest energy contract of his career. He strode onto the tarmac, the morning sun glinting off the polished fuselage of his Gulfstream G650. His assistant, Femi, offered a crisp, concise briefing as they walked up the air stairs. The cabin door opened, and Ao stepped into the familiar world of polished mahogany, plush cream leather, and the faint, clean scent of new money and purpose. But the symphony of his life hit a jarring, discordant note. His eyes, accustomed to scanning for potential threats and opportunities, immediately fixed on a figure stretched out on a divan. A woman, curled up like a kitten. She was fast asleep, a soft, rhythmic breathing the only sound besides the low, steady hum of the jet's pre-flight systems. Her long, intricately braided hair was a beautiful, dark contrast against the pristine white of the cashmere blanket she was wrapped in. Ao froze, a wave of cold, professional fury washing over him. This was not just a security breach. It was an affront to the carefully constructed order of his life. How could this have happened? His jet was a fortress, his security detail, led by the formidable Bayo, was one of the best in the country. The woman's presence was an impossibility. He took a cautious step forward, his gaze hardening as he took in the details. She was not dressed in the designer labels of his usual clientele. Her simple joggers and a soft hoodie spoke of a more grounded, hard-working reality. Yet, there was an undeniable grace to her, even in sleep. Her face, framed by loose braids, held a serene, almost innocent expression. For a moment, he simply watched her, the conflict between his instinct to call security and a strange, compelling curiosity battling within him. The question was a loud drumbeat in his mind. Who was this woman, and how had she, a beautiful and seemingly ordinary stranger, breached the impenetrable fortress of his life? Her presence wasn't just a physical intrusion. It was a disruption to the very fabric of his world, a prelude to a drama he had no idea was about to unfold. Bayo, Ao's head of security, burst into the cabin, a flustered mask of mortification on his face. He had failed his one cardinal rule: protect the boss at all costs. The sight of a stranger, a civilian, on the CEO's private jet was the kind of security breach that ended careers. But as he began to bark orders, Chidinma stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. For a moment, she was lost in a hazy dream of warm spices and steaming pots. Then the unfamiliar plushness of the seat and the low, sterile hum of the engines registered. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through the last remnants of sleep. She sat up abruptly, her mind racing. The polished wood, the cream leather, the impossibly large window. This wasn't the break room at the airport. It was a palace. And standing over her, his imposing figure casting a long shadow, was a man whose face she recognized from the pages of Forbes Africa. Ao Adekunle. Where am I? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Ao's expression was a study in controlled rage, but he held it in check. You are on my private jet, madam, he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. The question is, who are you? And how did you get here? Chidinma's heart hammered against her ribs. She was a woman who had spent her life trying to be invisible, to work hard and stay out of trouble. Now, she was at the center of a scandal, facing a billionaire who looked like a king whose throne had been usurped. She swallowed hard, forcing her voice to be steady. My name is Chidinma. Chidinma Okeke, she began, the words tumbling out in a rush. I own a small catering business, Chidis Kitchen. We had a big event last night for the airline's anniversary dinner. It was a huge contract for us. I was exhausted. I was waiting for my ride, but I just needed a moment to rest. I saw a plane with the door ajar, and I thought it was just a maintenance hangar. She paused, her voice trembling with the sheer absurdity of it all. I didn't mean to, sir. I fell asleep. As the story unfolded, Ao's anger slowly deflated, replaced by a deep-seated bewilderment. He looked at her, at the quiet determination in her eyes, and then at Bao, who still stood stiffly by the door. The caterer's tale was so improbable, so outlandish, yet her sincerity was undeniable. She spoke of her business with a passion that Ao, a man who built empires, could respect. He saw the smudges of flour on her hoodie, the small burn mark on her wrist that spoke of countless hours over a hot stove. This wasn't a criminal. This was a dreamer who had simply, impossibly, made a mistake. The absurdity of the situation finally broke through his cold professionalism. The billionaire, the man whose life was a fortress of security, had been undone by a hard-working caterer who needed to catch a few winks. He found himself not furious, but fascinated. The woman who had inadvertently broken his carefully constructed order was, in her own way, a force of nature. Bao stood rigid, waiting for the command to call airport security. The silence in the jet cabin was thick with tension, a stark contrast to the low, comforting hum of the engines. Chidinma, her heart still hammering, sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, bracing herself for the inevitable consequences of her colossal mistake. She was ready to be taken away, to face the scorn and humiliation that would surely follow. Ao, however, was in a battle with himself. His mind, trained for efficiency and order, screamed for him to follow protocol. This woman was a liability, a loose end he needed to cut immediately. But a deeper, more primal part of him, a part he rarely acknowledged, found itself captivated. She wasn't an operative. She was a victim of her own exhaustion and ambition. Her story, filled with the real, honest struggle of a woman trying to make her way in the world, resonated with him in a way his polished corporate life rarely did. He looked at his watch, the heavy gold a reminder of the world he inhabited. The flight was scheduled to depart in a few minutes. The last thing he needed was a delay from a security detail and a media frenzy. He turned to Chidinma, his voice cutting through the silence. My meeting in Abuja is critical, he stated, his tone matter-of-fact. It would be inefficient to wait for security to process this. It would cause a significant delay. Chidinma's head snapped up, her brows furrowed in confusion. Was this a threat? A twisted form of blackmail? Ao's gaze was steady, unwavering. I'm flying back to Lagos this evening. Stay on the jet. When we return, my driver will take you home. Chidinma's jaw dropped. The offer was so bizarre, so utterly out of place with his imposing demeanor. She thought she must have misheard. You're serious? I'm always serious, Chidinma, he replied, a flicker of something that might have been amusement in his eyes. Consider it a ride. You fell asleep on the jet after all. You might as well get a flight out of it. He gave a brief, dismissive gesture to Bao, who, though perplexed, understood the order to stand down. Chidinma was speechless. The man who had been a symbol of her impending disaster was now offering her a seat in his opulent life for the day. It was a ludicrous and terrifying proposition. He was a billionaire, a titan of industry. She was a caterer who smelled faintly of garlic and thyme. The chasm between them was immeasurable. Yet, his offer was not just a means of transportation. It was a lifeline, a strange and unsettling gift from a man she didn't understand. She took a deep breath, a mix of fear and a reckless, hopeful curiosity coursing through her veins, and nodded. She had just accepted a one-way ticket into a world she never knew existed, with a man who was now a complete and utter mystery. The powerful engines of the Gulfstream G650 roared to life, a deep, resonant rumble that vibrated through the floor. For Chidinma, who had only ever flown on commercial airliners, the experience was profoundly different. The acceleration was smooth and swift, pressing her gently back into the plush leather seat. As the jet lifted off the runway, she pressed her face to the large window, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. Lagos, a sprawling, chaotic metropolis she knew street by street, was shrinking below her into a miniature map of lights and concrete. Ao, in stark contrast, was completely oblivious. He had settled into his own seat with the quiet efficiency of a man who spent more time in the air than on the ground. A silver laptop sat open on a polished table, its screen filled with complex data and financial projections. He was already lost in his world of numbers and high-stakes deals, his brow furrowed in concentration. The roar of the engines, the breathtaking view. To him, it was all just the backdrop to another workday. Chidinma stole glances at him, a man so different from anyone she had ever met. He was a portrait of power and solitude. Despite the luxury surrounding him, there was a stillness, a sense of being completely alone. He seemed to carry the weight of an entire empire on his shoulders, and she wondered if he ever got to look at the world from the perspective she was experiencing now. After a while, a flight attendant, a woman with a kind smile, offered Chidinma a drink. She chose a simple glass of water, holding it carefully as if it were a delicate crystal. Ao, without looking up from his screen, gestured to the attendant. "Please, bring her one of the croissants," he said, his voice a low command. "She hasn't eaten." Chidinma was surprised. He hadn't seemed to notice her at all. The warm, buttery pastry was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. For a fleeting moment, as she ate, their eyes met over the top of his laptop screen. He didn't smile, but a hint of a different emotion, perhaps a quiet approval, flickered in his gaze before he returned to his work. The flight to Abuja was a blur of silence and unspoken thoughts. Chidinma realized that despite the extravagant setting, what she remembered most was that simple, almost paternal gesture of a croissant and a shared glance. It was a brief, surreal pause in both their lives, a moment where the caterer and the billionaire had shared a space and, for a few seconds, a quiet human connection. As the jet began its descent, bringing the world rushing back up to meet them, she felt a profound change within herself. Her brief journey into his world was over, but something had fundamentally shifted. She was no longer just the caterer who had made a mistake. She was the woman who had shared a quiet moment with a lonely king. Bayo, a man whose entire career was built on the absence of surprises, felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. The incident on the private jet was a glaring black mark on his otherwise flawless record. With a silent, burning determination to restore order, he initiated a full-scale investigation. This was no ordinary security review. It was a deep dive into every log, every record, and every face that had been near the Atakunal Group's hangar that night. He and his team spent the next 2 days poring over hours of CCTV footage. They cross-referenced airport access logs with vendor manifests and staff rosters. They interviewed every maintenance worker, every cleaning crew member, and every pilot on duty. Bayo's initial suspicion that Chidinma was a corporate spy was the first thing he sought to confirm. The results, however, were confounding. Chidinma Okeke was a ghost in the system. Her background was clean, a simple, hard-working life with a small, fledgling catering business named Chidis Kitchen. There were no hidden bank accounts, no ties to rival corporations, and no red flags of any kind. Every aspect of her story checked out. She was, to all logical conclusions, exactly who she said she was. Yet, the security breach itself was a puzzle of perfectly aligned coincidences that made Bayo's skin crawl. The specific hangar door she entered was found unlocked, a highly unusual oversight. The security patrol's route had been mysteriously altered just minutes before she arrived, a change attributed to a false alarm in another part of the airfield. The entire sequence of events seemed too neat. He presented his findings to Ao in a sterile, windowless office. "Sir, she is clean," Bao began, placing a binder on the table. "I've run every check. But the breach, the way it happened, it was orchestrated." He looked Ao directly in the eye. "She is not the threat. She's the distraction. Someone wanted her on that jet. Someone wanted to get your attention." Ao leaned back in his chair, a slight smile on his face. "Bao, you're looking for a conspiracy where there is none. Sometimes a coincidence is just a coincidence." He was remembering Chidinma's wide, earnest eyes as she described her passion for cooking. He was remembering the genuine fear in her voice. He refused to believe she was part of anything sinister. "Sir, a coincidence is a beautiful excuse for a crime," Bao countered, his tone respectful but firm. "My gut tells me this is the beginning of something. The Uche family's bid for the new energy contract is getting aggressive. We need to be on high alert." Ao, however, was already a world away, replaying the memory of a sleeping woman on his jet. He dismissed Bao's concerns, convinced that his newfound fascination was simply fate, not a trap. But as Bao walked away, the seasoned security chief knew with a chilling certainty that his billionaire boss, blinded by an unexpected connection, was walking directly into a storm he couldn't see coming. The days following the jet incident unfolded in a quiet, unexpected rhythm. Ao Atakunal, the man who measured his life in profit margins and strategic victories, found himself making excuses to see Chidinma. Their first date was an anachronism in his life. A simple lunch at a small, vibrant restaurant near her catering kitchen, a place filled with the rich smells of spices and the cheerful chatter of local patrons. Chidinma, initially guarded, slowly relaxed in his presence. She saw beyond the tailored suit and the imposing reputation to a man who was genuinely curious about her world. She spoke with a fiery passion about her dream of one day opening a culinary school for young women, a place where they could learn to build a business from the ground up. Her hands, which usually kneaded dough and chopped vegetables, gestured with unbridled excitement. "It's not just about cooking, Ao," she explained, her eyes alight. "It's about giving them a way to be independent, to create something of their own." Ao listened, captivated. In his world, ambition was often a cold, calculated force. Chidinma's ambition, however, was warm and vibrant, fueled by a desire to empower others. He found himself opening up in a way he hadn't in years, not about the numbers, but about the vision behind his new energy project, the hope of bringing sustainable power to remote villages, of leaving a legacy that was more than just money. Just as the conversation deepened, his phone buzzed. He picked up, and his entire demeanor shifted. The warmth in his eyes was replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. He spoke in clipped, authoritative tones, mentioning a counteroffer and the Uche family. Chidinma watched as the billionaire reemerged, the ruthless corporate titan she'd read about in the papers. The casual intimacy of their lunch was instantly shattered by the reminder of the high-stakes world he inhabited. After the call, a brief, awkward silence fell between them. "They're a rival family," he explained, his voice softer now. "They're trying to undercut our bid on a major government contract." Chidinma, surprisingly, wasn't intimidated. She saw the pressure he was under, the immense weight he carried. But she also saw the man who had just listened to her dreams with genuine interest. She realized that Ao was more than the headlines, a complex person caught between two different worlds, a ruthless boardroom and a quiet lunch with a woman who had a bigger dream than just money. As they parted ways, a profound, unspoken understanding passed between them. They were from different worlds, but in their shared ambition and passion, they had found a common ground. The high-rise office of the Atakunal Group was a bastion of order and efficiency, a stark contrast to the burgeoning chaos in Ao's private life. Bao, Ao's head of security, stood before his boss, a folder of carefully compiled evidence in his hands. His face, usually a study in calm professionalism, was etched with a deep sense of unease. "Sir, I have to be frank," Bao began, placing the folder on the gleaming glass table. "The Uche family's bid is getting desperate. They've been making a series of moves that are highly suspicious. My team has linked a shell company they own to a low-level subcontractor who has access to our main server room. AO nodded, his focus still on the business reports on his screen. Expected. Their bid is weak, so they're resorting to underhanded tactics. We're prepared. Sir, this is more than that, Bayo insisted, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone. He opened the folder to a page with a photo of Chidinma. And this is where she comes in. The security breach on your jet, the one that brought her into your life, it was a message. A very elegant, very dangerous message. Ao's head shot up, his expression hardening. Bayo, we've been over this. She's not a spy. The report confirmed it. She isn't, sir. That's the point, Bayo countered, his logic precise and chilling. She is not the threat. She's the vulnerability. The Uches know you're a man of discipline and routine. They saw that something as random and emotional as this would get through your defenses. They put her there not to harm you directly, but to get your attention, to create a blind spot. A beautiful, tragic pawn in a game you don't even know you're playing. The accusation hung in the air, a cold, clinical analysis of something Ao saw as a matter of fate. His burgeoning feelings for Chidinma, once a quiet, private joy, now felt exposed, cheapened by Bayo's blunt assessment. He slammed his hand on the table. Enough, Bayo, he commanded, his voice a low growl. You're seeing ghosts where there are none. Chidinma's story is real. She is a woman with a dream, not a tool for corporate espionage. This is a matter of heart, not a business plan. And I will not have you insult her innocence or my judgment. Bayo, a man who had sworn loyalty to Ao for 2 decades, saw the brick wall in front of him. He saw the love that was blinding his boss, and with a silent, resigned sigh, he closed the folder. As you wish, sir, he said, knowing with a cold certainty that Ao's blind spot, the woman he was falling for, was the very thing his enemies would use to bring him down. The shadow of a threat had just become a tangible, looming danger, and Ao, in his romantic naivety, was inviting it in with open arms. The boardroom was a symphony of polished marble and cold steel, a stage where billions were won and lost. Ao Atakunal stood at the head of the long table, the picture of unshakable confidence. He had spent months preparing for this moment. His team was behind him, a phalanx of brilliant minds. Seated opposite him was Mr. Uche, the patriarch of the rival family. His eyes narrowed into a smug, watchful sneer. The air was thick with the weight of expectation. Ao began his pitch, his voice clear and commanding as he detailed his company's vision for the new energy contract. His presentation was a masterpiece of data-driven strategy and visionary foresight. He clicked to the next slide, the one that held the proprietary financial projections, the one that would prove their bid was the most efficient and profitable. But instead of the intricate graphs and carefully calculated numbers, a stark, white screen flashed with a single, devastating message. Error. File corrupt. Data not found. Ao's heart seized in his chest. His carefully constructed facade of calm professionalism wavered for a split second. The room seemed to hold its breath. He tried the next slide, then the one after it. The same message appeared, an impersonal condemnation of his meticulous work. His meticulously built fortress of data had been breached. He felt the cold, hard stare of Mr. Uche, whose smug expression was now a triumphant smirk. Around the table, the other board members exchanged uneasy glances. Ao's team was a frantic mess, their fingers flying over keyboards in a desperate and futile attempt to salvage the presentation. Refusing to be defeated, Ao pushed forward. He began to speak from memory, talking through the projections, but without the validated data on the screen, his words lacked their usual power. The pitch, once a symphony of precision, had descended into a shaky, desperate monologue. The meticulously built foundation of his bid crumbled beneath him, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. The verdict was swift and humiliating. The contract was awarded to the Uche family. As he walked out of the boardroom, the weight of the loss was immense, but it was nothing compared to the quiet, seething rage that boiled beneath his calm exterior. He knew, with a gut-wrenching certainty, that this was not an accident. This was a targeted attack, a masterful act of corporate espionage. And as he tried to piece together how it happened, his mind, with a terrible, heartbreaking coldness, went to the only variable in his life he couldn't control. The woman who had, by some impossible fate, stumbled into his life on a quiet Tuesday morning. The seed of doubt planted by Bayo had just taken root. The shockwaves of the Adekunle Group's loss rippled through the financial world, but they hit Ayo's office like a seismic event. His office, once a sanctuary of power, now felt like a gilded cage. The media, a pack of vultures scenting blood, descended upon the story with a ferocious appetite. The headlines screamed of corporate espionage and a spectacular failure, hinting at a traitor in the ranks. Ayo felt a humiliation he hadn't experienced since he was a young man first starting out. In the middle of the maelstrom, Bayo walked into his office, a grim look on his face. He didn't need to speak. The folder he placed on the desk said it all. It was the result of a deeper dive, a meticulous investigation into every person who had been near the company's server room on the day of the pitch. "We found something, sir," Bayo said, his voice quiet but heavy with the weight of the new information. A new catering intern was the last person to have access to the server room before the sabotage. She works for a vendor named Chitty's Kitchen. Ayo's blood ran cold. The name hit him like a physical blow. Chidinma's business. He looked at the file, at the photograph of a young, smiling girl in a catering uniform. The intern's access, a seemingly innocent favor from a low-level employee, was the perfect cover. The timing, the opportunity, the person, it was all too clean, too perfect. Bayo's warning about a pawn echoed in his ears, a chilling premonition that had just come to pass. A profound sense of betrayal, sharp and bitter, washed over him. The lunch dates, the talks about her culinary school, the sincere look in her eyes, was it all a performance? A masterful ploy to get close to him, to create a blind spot that his enemies could exploit? The beautiful, unlikely love story he had so naively believed in now felt like a carefully crafted lie, a trap set with the most dangerous kind of bait, emotion. Meanwhile, in her small catering kitchen, Chidinma's world was collapsing. The media, having caught wind of the lead, shifted their focus. Reporters descended on her street, their cameras flashing like lightning. Headlines like "Billionaire's lover tied to corporate sabotage" and "Caterer from the slums accused of espionage" tore her reputation to shreds. Her phone rang endlessly with hate calls, and a scheduled catering job was abruptly canceled. Her dream, her business, everything she had worked so hard for, was being destroyed by a rumor, a lie she couldn't fight. She was a public pariah, and the one man she had come to trust had vanished from her life. Sitting alone in his office, the weight of the evidence heavy in his hands, Ayo felt a cold, hard ache. The choice seemed brutally simple. Believe the facts and write off the woman he was falling for as a ruthless con artist, or ignore the evidence and risk everything. In that moment of profound, lonely isolation, the beautiful love story that had begun on his jet felt like the most expensive mistake he had ever made. The phone was a malevolent presence on the counter of Chitty's Kitchen, ringing with a ferocity that seemed to match the pounding in Chidinma's head. It wasn't a client calling for an order. It was a deluge of venomous phone calls, each one a fresh stab of betrayal. "Corporate spy," one voice hissed. "You think you could fool a man like Ayo Adekunle?" Another jeered. The messages that flooded her phone were even worse, filled with vitriol and threats. Her small, hopeful world had become a public arena for scorn. Outside her small apartment, a pack of journalists was permanently camped out, their camera flashes like lightning on a stormy night. She couldn't leave without being hounded. Her face, once a source of pride on her business cards, was now plastered across newspapers with damning headlines. "Billionaire's lover tied to sabotage." The moniker Chidinma the Saboteur had become a cruel and familiar term. The final, devastating blow came with a phone call from the event planner for a major wedding she was meant to cater. "Chidinma, I'm so sorry." The woman's voice was laced with an awkward pity that was more painful than anger. "But with all this, the clients are worried. We have to cancel." The deposit was being returned, but the reputation she had painstakingly built, The trust she had earned was gone. She stood alone in her kitchen, a room that had once been a source of comfort and purpose. The gleaming steel of her industrial-sized mixer, the shelves of exotic spices, the stacks of clean plates. They were all now just expensive, useless junk. Her dream of a culinary school, of providing a future for other young women, felt like a joke. She had been so close, so full of hope, and then it had all turned to ash. The worst part of it all was Ao's silence. He was a man who could move mountains with a single phone call, who could command the attention of a nation. But he had vanished. He hadn't called, hadn't sent a message, hadn't issued a statement defending her innocence. The man who had seen something in her beyond her circumstances, the man who had shown her a fleeting glimpse of a different life, had simply disappeared. The sting of his abandonment was sharper than any public humiliation. She had let herself believe in a fairy tale, and the price of that belief was the destruction of everything she had. For days, she was consumed by a numbing despair. But in the pit of her despair, a hard, defiant seed began to grow. It wasn't pity for herself, but a white-hot anger at the injustice. She was not a spy. She was not a criminal. She was a woman who had worked hard and been betrayed. She couldn't just disappear. With a newfound strength born of heartbreak, she picked up her keys. She was going to find him. She was going to look him in the eye and demand to know why he had believed a lie over her. The time for hiding was over. The time for a reckoning had arrived. The phone was a malevolent presence on the counter of Chitty's kitchen, ringing with a ferocity that seemed to match the pounding in Chidinma's head. It wasn't a client calling for an order. It was a deluge of venomous phone calls, each one a fresh stab of betrayal. Corporate spy, one voice hissed. You think you could fool a man like Ao Atakunal? Another jeered. The messages that flooded her phone were even worse, filled with vitriol and threats. Her small, hopeful world had become a public arena for scorn. Outside her small apartment, a pack of journalists was permanently camped out, their camera flashes like lightning on a stormy night. She couldn't leave without being hounded. Her face, once a source of pride on her business cards, was now plastered across newspapers with damning headlines. Billionaire's lover tied to sabotage. The moniker Chidinma the Saboteur had become a cruel and familiar term. The final, devastating blow came with a phone call from the event planner for a major wedding she was meant to cater. Chidinma, I'm so sorry. The woman's voice was laced with an awkward pity that was more painful than anger. But with all this, the clients are worried. We have to cancel. The deposit was being returned, but the reputation she had painstakingly built, the trust she had earned, was gone. She stood alone in her kitchen, a room that had once been a source of comfort and purpose. The gleaming steel of her industrial-sized mixer, the shelves of exotic spices, the stacks of clean plates. They were all now just expensive, useless junk. Her dream of a culinary school, of providing a future for other young women, felt like a joke. She had been so close, so full of hope, and then it had all turned to ash. The worst part of it all was Ao's silence. He was a man who could move mountains with a single phone call, who could command the attention of a nation. But he had vanished. He hadn't called, hadn't sent a message, hadn't issued a statement defending her innocence. The man who had seen something in her beyond her circumstances, the man who had shown her a fleeting glimpse of a different life, had simply disappeared. The sting of his abandonment was sharper than any public humiliation. She had let herself believe in a fairy tale, and the price of that belief was the destruction of everything she had. For days, she was consumed by a numbing despair. But in the pit of her despair, a hard, defiant seed began to grow. It wasn't pity for herself, but a white-hot anger at the injustice. She was not a spy. She was not a criminal. She was a woman who had worked hard and been betrayed. She couldn't just disappear. With a newfound strength born of heartbreak, she picked up her keys. She was going to find him. She was going to look him in the eye and demand to know why he had believed a lie over her. The time for hiding was over. The time for a reckoning had arrived. The imposing glass doors of the Atakunal Group Tower seemed to part for no one. But Chidinma, fueled by a desperation that had hardened into courage, stormed through them. Her hair was a mess, her clothes were rumpled, and her eyes, red-rimmed from sleepless nights, burned with a fierce, singular purpose. The receptionist, a poised young woman, was no match for her. Chidinma simply pushed past, her destination the top floor, where the man who had stolen her hope now sat in judgment. She burst into Ao's office, the sudden eruption of emotion shattering the room's serene, antiseptic silence. Ao looked up from his desk, and the sight of her, not the serene woman on his jet, but a raw, beautiful, broken creature, shook him to his core. "Why?" she demanded, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Why did you do this to me?" Ao stood, a wall of cool, professional distance between them. "I didn't do anything, Chidinma. The evidence points to your company. To you." He gestured to a folder on his desk, the same one Bao had given him. "The last person in the server room was your intern. The file that was corrupted was accessed from a terminal she used." Chidinma laughed, a short, bitter sound that held no humor. "An intern? A file? You think that's why? You think that's enough to throw away everything we—" She trailed off, unable to say the word shared. "Did you ever believe me, Ao? When I told you about my dreams, when I told you about my business? Or was I just a fun little project for you? A slumdog you could play with for a week before you got bored?" The accusation hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had been so focused on the logic, on the evidence, that he hadn't considered the emotional cost. "It's not about that," he said, his voice strained. "It's about facts." "Facts? Your facts have ruined me," she cried, her voice rising. "They have destroyed my business, my reputation. They have made me a criminal in a city I call home. Did you think I was some kind of ruthless spy? That I would throw away my whole life just to destroy a piece of paper for a man who doesn't even know my name?" Her raw, unfiltered agony was a powerful counterpoint to his cold, sterile logic. She wasn't just defending herself. She was pleading for him to see her. She reminded him of the little moments, the conversations at lunch, the quiet passion in her voice as she spoke of her culinary school. She was not a statistic on a report. She was a woman, a person whose heart he had broken. As her words hung in the air, a profound crack appeared in the wall of his suspicion. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time since the sabotage, and he saw not a spy, but the woman he had been falling in love with. The evidence was damning, but the truth in her tear-filled eyes was undeniable. The man who had been so certain of the facts was now utterly, completely lost in the face of her pain. He had broken her, and in doing so, he had broken himself. The confrontation was not a final goodbye, but a moment of terrible clarity. He had been wrong, and he had to make it right. The echoing silence of his office was more deafening than Chidinma's cries. Ao sat down, the report on his desk now feeling like a lie he had believed, a mirror reflecting his own profound failure. He had seen the cold, hard facts, but he had missed the raw, undeniable truth burning in her eyes. She was a woman of fierce pride, not a criminal. The betrayal he had felt was not from her, but from his own lack of faith. A wave of crushing guilt washed over him. He had been so convinced of his own logic, so blinded by the perfect storm of circumstantial evidence, that he had failed to see the woman he was falling for. He had broken her with his silence and his suspicion. In trying to protect his business, he had almost destroyed his heart. The empire he had built was a testament to his intellect, but it was his heart that was now telling him the truth. He picked up the phone, his hand trembling slightly, and called Bao. When the security chief entered, Ao's demeanor was completely different. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a grim humility. "Bao, I was wrong," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Everything you said was right. She's not the threat. She's the victim." Bao, a man of few words, simply nodded. He had seen this kind of change before. A powerful man humbled by a truth he couldn't see. "Forget the caterer," Ao commanded, his focus now razor-sharp. "The question is not how she got on my jet, but who put her there, and who sabotaged my pitch. They framed her. They used her to get to me. I want you to go over every single detail again. Find the real culprit. Use every resource we have. I don't care how much it costs. His mission had shifted entirely. This was no longer about a contract or a security breach. This was about justice. It was about earning back the trust of the woman he loved. The love he had tried to suppress had now become the driving force of his life, a fierce, protective fire. He would not only clear her name, but he would expose the man who had betrayed him and used her as a pawn. He would move heaven and earth to prove that he had been wrong and that she was innocent. The fight had just begun, and this time he was fighting for the woman he loved. The high-tech security room of the Atakunal Group, usually a place of silent vigilance, was now a buzzing command center. The dynamic between Ao and Bayo had shifted entirely. They were no longer a boss and his head of security, but two men on a mission, their focus singular and relentless. They had a new truth. Chidinma was not the suspect, but the victim. Their new task was to find the hand that had moved her and the one that had pulled the strings. Ao had enlisted a team of the best digital forensics experts money could buy. They dove into the company's server logs, sifting through millions of lines of code and data packets. They weren't just looking for an anomaly. They were looking for a ghost, a premeditated act that had been meticulously erased. The breakthrough came late one night. A junior analyst, his eyes red from hours of staring at a screen, managed to recover a fragment of a deleted file from the server room's CCTV. The footage was grainy, but the image was unmistakable. It showed the catering intern from Chidinma's company being handed an envelope by a man whose back was to the camera. It was not a grand act of espionage, but a simple, dirty transaction. The footage confirmed Chidinma's innocence, but it opened a new, darker door. Using the timestamps from the video, the forensics team cross-referenced the intern's phone records. The investigation led them to a series of encrypted messages that had been sent to a burner phone. It took another day of painstaking work to crack the encryption, and what they found was a digital trail of betrayal that sent a cold wave of shock through Ao's core. The messages detailed the entire plot: the setup of the catering gig, the payment to the intern, the deliberate sabotage of Ao's presentation, and the smear campaign against Chidinma. Each message was a nail in a coffin of trust. As they traced the communication, a pattern began to emerge. The messages were coming from an IP address that was not only within the Atakunal Group network, but was also masked with an advanced encryption protocol that could only be accessed from a highly privileged account. Ao watched, his jaw tight with a cold, building rage, as the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. The account was linked to his second-in-command, a man who had been at his side for over a decade, a man he trusted with his life, the man whose back had been to the camera in the video, the man who was now sitting in his office, a smug, confident smile on his face, oblivious to the fact that his carefully constructed web of lies had just been unraveled. The traitor's name was Emeka, and the betrayal was personal. The final piece of the puzzle was not a file, but a name: Emeka. The truth hit Ao with a force more brutal than any corporate loss. The man who had been his confidant, his most trusted advisor for over a decade, was a traitor. The evidence was damning and irrefutable. Ao and Bayo, in their makeshift command center, stared at the damning data on the screen. The encrypted communication trail led from Emeka's privileged corporate account to the Uche family's shell company. The recovered CCTV footage showed Emeka, in a shadowed corner, handing a thick envelope to Chidinma's unsuspecting intern. The intricate plot, the calculated sabotage, the malicious smear campaign against an innocent woman. It was all his doing. Ao felt a cold, deep rage settle in his heart, one that was far more painful than professional disappointment. Emeka wasn't just an employee. He was a friend. He was family. They had built this empire together, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. And all this time, a cancer of resentment and envy had been growing within him. Emeka had always been in Ao's shadow, and the Uches, ever the opportunists, had simply offered him the light he craved. The betrayal wasn't about money. It was about pride, a slow-burning jealousy that had finally erupted in a vengeful fire. With a grim finality, Ao stood up. The time for sorrow and disbelief was over. This was a war, and he had to fight it with a clear head. "We have to get a full confession," he commanded, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. We need to set a trap. Something they won't be able to resist. He and Bayo began to lay the groundwork for a new operation. A plan to bait Emeka with a lucrative, fake deal that would lure him and the Uches into the open. Later that day, as Ao walked through his office, he saw Emeka, smiling and laughing with a client. His betrayal a cold, secret weight on his shoulders. Ao's face, a mask of steely control, betrayed none of the fury burning inside him. He gave Emeka a terse nod, a silent promise of the storm that was about to break. He had lost a contract, but he had found a traitor. Now he would reclaim his life, his company, and the innocence of the woman he loved. The once vibrant apartment that housed Chidinma's dreams was now a ghost of its former self. Boxes were stacked in corners, her expensive catering equipment was packed away, and the air was heavy with the stale scent of defeat. Chidinma herself was a shadow of the woman who had captivated Ao on his jet. She sat on an old sofa, staring blankly at the wall, a hollow ache where her hope used to be. A knock at the door, soft and tentative, went unanswered. But the knock persisted, a rhythm of persistence that she knew belonged to only one man. She opened the door, and the sight of Ao, his face a mask of profound guilt, was a physical blow. He wasn't in a tailored suit. He wore a simple t-shirt and jeans, a humbled man, not a powerful billionaire. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Come to see the damage your facts have done?" Ao took a cautious step inside, his eyes sweeping over the empty apartment, his heart sinking with every glance. "Chidinma, I was wrong," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have believed you. I should have trusted my heart over my head." He pulled a tablet from his bag, his hands shaking slightly. "This is a full confession of my failure, but it's also proof of your innocence." He played the grainy CCTV footage, showing the catering intern taking the envelope. He showed her the recovered messages and the damning evidence that traced it all back to his second-in-command, Emeka. Chidinma watched it all, her face a storm of conflicting emotions. It was a vindication, but it was also a painful confirmation of a conspiracy that had cost her everything. As the last message scrolled across the screen, a silent tear traced a path down her cheek, followed by another and another. The dam of her suppressed pain finally broke. She wasn't just crying because she was innocent. She was crying because he was there. He had come back. He had believed her. In that moment, all the pain, the betrayal, the humiliation, poured out of her in a flood of heaving sobs. Ao didn't speak. He simply knelt before her, his arms wrapping around her as she wept, holding her as if to atone for every moment of doubt, every day of silence. It was a silent promise of his faith, a silent plea for forgiveness. As her tears subsided, she looked up, her eyes still red, but filled with a new light. "You were wrong," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But you came back." Their reconciliation was not a grand gesture of flowers and promises, but a quiet, powerful moment forged in the fire of betrayal. In that small, barren apartment, they found their way back to each other, their bond now stronger and deeper, built on a foundation of trust that had been tested and had survived. They had lost a battle, but they had won each other back. Now, united, they were ready for war. The small, quiet apartment was no longer a place of sorrow, but a war room. Ao and Chidinma, sitting across from each other at her small dining table, were a united front. Their shared pain had hardened into a steely resolve. Chidinma was no longer a victim. She was a partner, her mind as sharp and focused as Ao's. Together, they began to plot their counter-conspiracy. "We have to get them to confess," Ao explained, his voice low and intense. "We can't just hand the police a digital trail. We need their own words on tape. Something that proves the corporate espionage and the frame-up." The plan was a meticulous, high-stakes game of corporate chess. Ao would create a phantom deal, a ghost of an opportunity so lucrative and so secret that it would be irresistible to both Emeka and the Uche family. They called it Project Phoenix, a new, massive energy project that was supposedly in the early stages of development and would guarantee a fortune to anyone who could get a piece of it. Chidinma's role was crucial. Using her small network of connections, she would be the source of the leak. She would discreetly pass information to an old friend who worked in a different sector, letting a carefully crafted rumor about Project Phoenix ripple through the city's social circles. The story would be just believable enough to catch the attention of the Uches, and by extension, their mole, Emeka. The next few days were a tense, nerve-wracking exercise in deception. Ao had his team create fake documents, presentations, and financial projections for Project Phoenix. Emeka, ever the predator, took the bait immediately. He began subtly probing Ao for information about the new deal, his arrogance and greed a palpable stench in the air. He believed he was still a step ahead, unaware that every question he asked, every discrete file he accessed, was being logged and monitored. The trap was finally set. Ao, through a series of subtly manipulated channels, made it seem as though he was in a precarious financial position due to the lost contract and was now desperate for a new investor. The bait was taken. Emeka, believing Ao was on the ropes and that this was his chance to get in on a ground-floor deal with the Uches, arranged a clandestine meeting. The location was an abandoned warehouse, a perfect setting for a secret exchange. He was going to sell the information he had stolen, unaware that he was walking into a room that was rigged with cameras and microphones. He was about to confess, not to a partner in crime, but to a silent audience that was waiting to hear every word. The abandoned warehouse, a cavernous space of cold concrete and whispering shadows, was the perfect setting for a betrayal. Emeka walked in, a briefcase clutched in his hand, a smug, triumphant smile on his face. He was met by Mr. Uche and his son, their faces a mixture of avarice and anticipation. Emeka, in his arrogance, believed he was a step ahead of everyone, a brilliant mastermind about to cash in on his long-overdue reward. "The information you have, Emeka," Mr. Uche began, his voice a low growl. "Is it as good as you claim?" Emeka laughed, a self-satisfied chuckle that echoed in the vast space. "Better. Ao is desperate. This Project Phoenix is a gold mine. I set him up for failure before, and I'm doing it again. The man is a fool." Hidden in a nondescript van a block away, Ao and Bayo listened, their faces grim and set. The audio feed from the microphones planted in the warehouse was crystal clear. Every word, every boast, every arrogant confession was being recorded. Emeka, emboldened by his perceived victory, began to detail his crimes. "The pitch? That was my doing. I paid a catering intern to plant the corrupted files. It was brilliant, wasn't it? The perfect scapegoat. And Ao, he bought it hook, line, and sinker." He smirked. "He's so infatuated with that girl, that Chidinma. He wouldn't believe she could be a spy, but he had no choice. She was the one loose end, a beautiful, tragic pawn in my game." His confession was a torrent of ego and resentment, a decade's worth of jealousy pouring out in a single, damning monologue. He revealed how he'd manipulated the security on the jet, how he'd been working with the Uches for months, and his belief that he had always been smarter and more deserving than Ao. "We have everything we need, sir," Bayo whispered, his voice laced with triumph. Just as Emeka was about to hand over the fake documents for Project Phoenix, the silent warehouse was suddenly flooded with a blinding light. A dozen police officers, led by a determined Ao, stormed into the room. "Emeka, you fool," Ao said, his voice cold and hard, a stark contrast to the roaring sirens now approaching from the street. "The only fool here is you." Emeka's face, a second ago a mask of triumphant glee, collapsed into a horrified realization. He had walked straight into a trap, his own greed and arrogance his undoing. The man he thought he was outsmarting was now standing over him, his face a portrait of cold, righteous justice. The game was over. The abandoned warehouse, once a place of treachery, was now a scene of triumphant chaos. Police sirens wailed as officers swarmed the area, their presence a deafening end to the conspirators' secret meeting. Emeka, his face a mask of shock and disbelief, was led away in handcuffs, his furious protests silenced by the hard facts Ao had presented. The Uche family, their powerful facade shattered, could only look on in impotent rage as their carefully constructed scheme crumbled around them. The news of the successful sting operation was a bombshell that rocked the nation's financial and social circles. The media, which had so ruthlessly condemned Chidinma, now had a new story. Headlines that once screamed of corporate sabotage now hailed Ao Adekunle as a hero of corporate integrity. The story was a sensational mix of high-stakes drama and personal redemption, a tale of a billionaire who had been betrayed by his most trusted friend but had fought back to clear the name of an innocent woman. The consequences for the conspirators were swift and severe. Emeka faced criminal charges for corporate espionage and fraud, his life's work and reputation in ruins. The Uche family, exposed as the masterminds of a ruthless and dishonest scheme, was disgraced. The government, upon reviewing the damning evidence, annulled their contract and launched a full-scale investigation into their other business dealings. The very deal they had stolen from Ao was now gone, a hollow victory that had cost them everything. In a rare public statement, Ao stood before a sea of cameras. He spoke not of his victory, but of the immense pain and injustice that had been inflicted upon a good, hard-working woman. He publicly apologized to Chidinma, acknowledging his own brief moment of doubt and praising her strength and resilience in the face of such a malicious attack. His statement was a powerful message about integrity and justice, and it cemented his reputation not just as a business titan, but as a man of true character. Chidinma, watching the news from her small apartment, felt a profound sense of relief. The cloud of public shame that had darkened her life for weeks was finally lifting. The city that had once shunned her now showered her with support. She had gone from a pariah to a symbol of grace and resilience. The long nightmare was finally over. The fight had been won not just in a boardroom, but in the court of public opinion. With her name cleared and her reputation restored, she was finally free to begin to rebuild her life, a task she was no longer alone in. The public storm had passed, but the work of rebuilding had just begun. Ao, now a man driven by a profound need to atone for his initial doubt, dedicated himself to helping Chidinma reclaim her life. It wasn't an act of charity, but of partnership. He found a new, larger space for Chidi's kitchen, a modern, gleaming storefront with state-of-the-art equipment. But he never imposed his will. Every decision, from the color of the walls to the brand of the ovens, was hers. He was simply a resource, a silent partner in her dream. For Chidinma, the process of rebuilding was a form of therapy. Every box unpacked, every new piece of equipment installed, was a tangible step away from the nightmare and toward a future she could believe in again. The fear and despair that had once been her constant companions were slowly replaced by a renewed confidence. The public vindication had healed her reputation, but Ao's unwavering faith had healed her heart. Their relationship deepened in this period of quiet work. Their conversations were no longer about conspiracies and betrayals, but about menus, floor plans, and her plans for a culinary school. They would spend evenings together, a calm and easy rhythm settling between them. Ao, the titan of industry, would listen patiently as she spoke of the perfect recipe for jollof rice or the best way to manage a kitchen staff. He saw a depth and a wisdom in her that transcended any business deal he had ever made. She, in turn, saw a different side of him. He was a man who, despite his immense wealth, was humbled by the simple joy of creating something from scratch. He was her biggest supporter, her quiet anchor in a world that had tried to drown her. They were no longer two people from different worlds who had met by chance. They were two people whose worlds had collided and were now, slowly and beautifully, merging into one. The chapter reached its heartening climax on a Friday evening. Chidinma stood in the center of her new, immaculate kitchen. The lights were on, the new stainless steel ovens gleamed, and the air hummed with a promise of new beginnings. She looked at Ao, who stood watching her from the doorway, a look of profound love and pride on his face. She had lost everything and, in the process, had found herself, her purpose, and the man who had helped her find it. The journey of rebuilding was complete, and now a new chapter was about to begin. The private jet, once a symbol of the vast chasm between their two worlds, was now a sanctuary of their shared love. Ao, a man who commanded boardrooms and navigated global markets with unflinching confidence, was a study in nervous anticipation. He had arranged for the jet to be parked on a secluded section of the tarmac, its interior transformed. Soft, ambient lighting replaced the cold overhead fluorescence, and the scent of 100 white roses filled the air. This was where their story had begun, and this was where he wanted to ask her to be his forever. When Chidinma stepped onto the jet, a look of profound surprise on her face, she was met not with business documents, but with the quiet, expectant gaze of the man she loved. Ao took her hand, his own feeling warm and strong. He led her to the divan where she had once been found sleeping, a spot that was now the most sacred place on earth to him. Chidinma, he began, his voice a little shaky, a vulnerability she had never heard before. When I found you here, I was a different man. My life was about profit, about control, about having a fortress of order. You were the beautiful, chaotic anomaly that broke through all of it. He recounted their journey, the shock of their first meeting, the quiet beauty of their first dates, the pain of the betrayal, and the fierce fire of their reconciliation. He spoke not of his wealth or his power, but of the man she had made him, a man who had learned the value of faith and integrity over facts and figures. You saved me from a life of being alone at the top, he confessed, his eyes shining. You showed me that a dream isn't just a business plan. It's a piece of your soul. He then knelt before her, pulling a small box from his pocket. The ring inside, a simple, elegant diamond, was a testament to a love that was pure and unadorned by the trappings of his wealth. Chidinma Okeke, he said, his voice now clear and strong. You are the most resilient, the most beautiful, and the most courageous woman I have ever known. Will you do me the honor of being my partner, my equal, my wife? Tears streamed down Chidinma's face, a joyous cascade of emotions she couldn't contain. She wasn't just saying yes to a proposal. She was saying yes to a destiny she never dreamed was possible. She was saying yes to a man who had seen her at her lowest and had still chosen to love her. The jet, once a cage of her own making, was now a vessel of their love, a quiet, soaring promise of a future that had begun thousands of feet in the air and was now firmly grounded in their hearts. The months leading up to the wedding were a beautiful, joyful chaos. The planning of their nuptials was more than just an event. It was a powerful fusion of their two worlds. Ao, accustomed to orchestrating multi-million-dollar deals with a single phone call, found himself immersed in a world of wedding planners, florists, and cake tastings. But he was no longer just a billionaire signing checks. He was an active partner, his decisions guided by the woman who had brought so much light into his life. Chidinma was a co-creator of their grand Nigerian white wedding. Her influence was everywhere, infusing the opulent plans with a warmth and authenticity that was uniquely hers. She designed the menu, a masterpiece of modern Nigerian cuisine that showcased her culinary talent, a loving nod to the business that had first brought them together. The floral arrangements, a breathtaking cascade of vibrant orchids and lilies, were a reflection of her vibrant personality, a far cry from the conservative choices Ao's family might have initially preferred. Their families, once separated by a vast social divide, were now united by a shared joy. Ao's mother, initially a woman of polite skepticism, had completely fallen for Chidinma's grace and resilience. She would often pull her aside, sharing family traditions and beaming with pride at the daughter-in-law she had found. Chidinma's family and friends, who had stood by her during the darkest of times, were now celebrating with a fervent joy that was infectious. They saw not a Cinderella story, but a testament to a woman's strength and the power of true love. The wedding venue, a lavish hall draped in white silk and crystal chandeliers, was a breathtaking sight. Every detail, from the engraved invitations to the live band flown in from London, spoke of a grand celebration. Chidinma's dress, a stunning white gown with intricate lace details, was a work of art, a symbol of the beautiful, powerful woman she had become. The entire city was abuzz, a collective celebration of a love story that had overcome betrayal and public humiliation to find its happy ending. On the eve of the wedding, Ao and Chidinma sat together in a quiet moment of reflection, the last night they would spend apart. They held hands, not speaking, but communicating through a profound, silent understanding. The chaos of the wedding planning, the immense pressure of their public lives. All of it faded away. There was only the quiet promise of the next day. The journey, which had started with a chance encounter in a private jet, was finally leading them home. The wedding day dawned with a clear, beautiful sky, a reflection of the hope that filled the hearts of everyone in attendance. The grand hall, draped in white silk and overflowing with the vibrant colors of Chidinma's chosen flowers, was a breathtaking sight. All of Lagos high society was there, but all eyes were on Chidinma as she walked down the aisle, resplendent in her white gown. She wasn't just a beautiful bride. She was a woman who had walked through fire and emerged stronger, a living testament to resilience. Ao stood at the altar, his face a portrait of profound love and awe. When their eyes met, 1,000 silent promises passed between them. He saw the scared, exhausted woman on his jet, and she saw the man who had been a lonely king in his castle. Now they were standing together, ready to build a new life. Their vows were the emotional heart of the ceremony. Ao, his voice thick with emotion, spoke of their journey, of how he had found his heart in the unlikeliest of places and how her unwavering faith had saved him. Chidinma, in turn, spoke of the man who had seen beyond her circumstances, who had been a quiet hero in her darkest hour. Their promises to each other were not just of love, but of trust, loyalty, and a shared future built on the foundation of their extraordinary past. The reception was a jubilant celebration. The air was filled with music and laughter, a joyous release after months of tension. The entire city was celebrating not just a union, but a victory over betrayal and a triumph of true love. As they danced their first dance, the crowd cheering around them, Ao and Chidinma moved as one, a beautiful, perfect rhythm that was a reflection of their new life. As the night drew to a close, they slipped away hand in hand. Their path to the airport was a quiet, intimate moment amidst the noise of the celebration. And there, waiting for them, was the final, perfect surprise. The private jet, the very one where their story had begun, was ready for departure. As the powerful engines roared to life and the jet lifted off the ground, Chidinma and Ao sat together, her head on his shoulder. They looked out the window at the glittering lights of Lagos, a city that had tried to tear them apart but had, in the end, been a witness to their beautiful beginning. The jet was no longer a symbol of their differences, but a symbol of their shared future. They were no longer a billionaire and a caterer, but a husband and a wife, flying together, soaring towards a life that was finally, and beautifully, just beginning.